Hello and welcome to Terrain Oddity. My name is Jane. Today I'm going to be showing you 5 ways to make tarmac/asphalt roads. Now I'm not actually going to show you how to make roads because you could do country roads, etc. These are just sort of 5 products that we're going to look at are ways of making the tarmac/asphalt road. I literally don't know really the difference between tarmac and asphalt. I had a quick look. It seems to be that one, it's just the kind of binder that is used. Maybe, don't correct me, I'm not sure I care. But yeah, for example, the 5 ways we're going to look at, I've not got all the sheets here, but we're of course going to look at the classic sandpaper. We're going to look at just using filler and texturing that. We have the craft foam, and I'm sure there's one more that I can't remember. Cork. We're going to look at Cork sheets, and then the 5th one is a bit of a cheat because it's a specialist product. This is the AKA Terrain's asphalt diorama stuff, but you know there are other products. But I just wanted to get a specialist product in there, and yeah, we'll go through each 5. So what I'm going to do is I'll sort of show you how to make it look like a road, and then I'll quickly paint them up and I'll show you the texture that is achieved. I'm just going to do them on little square, rectangular sheets of foam. You could do them, you know, however, if you're doing a city board, you would do a city board. I am going to be making a city board soon, which is why I actually made these. So let's get on and we'll look at the 5. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to very quickly show you how to make them look like roads, but I'm also going to talk about the texture and the pros and cons of using each one. So for the sandpaper, I have these in little sandpaper rectangles. You can get a roll, which is obviously better because then you aren't limited by the length of it. You're only limited by the width of the sandpaper. You can obviously put them up together, but then you'll have join lines, and join lines are a potential problem with several of these products. So for the sandpaper, it's literally just a case of glue the sandpaper to your whatever it is, your board in this sense. If you can, you want to put some weight on it because sandpaper because it's paper, it can sort of bubble up a little bit. So put some weight on it. I think I used super glue, which is probably not the best. Probably PVA would be the best, but all you really need to do with sandpaper is glue it on and then paint it. It's not really the most complicated of the sets. Now you won't really be able to put cracks in very easily. Now you might be able to do it, but I never tried. For the craft foam, this craft foam, by the way, is very cheap. You can get this from hobby crafts, hobby stores. It's literally 2mm craft foam, very flexible. It's not extruded, it's very flexible sheets. There's a little bit of texture to it, which is why we're using it, but I found that there wasn't a lot of texture to it. But it is essentially the same method as the sandpaper. We're literally just going to cut it to size and then glue it on. Now, one of the reasons I'm not using this is, again, you're limited by the length or the width unless you want to try and have a join line. Now, you can put these up together and make them look fine, sure, but you always have that element of the join line. So in this case, it's just to cut it out to size and glue it on. Again, I used super glue. Probably PVA is better because super glue can actually melt foam. Next up, we're going to be looking at the Cork sheet. Now, the Cork sheet has a really nice look to it. I did find that it really absorbed some of the glue. That I think I was trying to use super glue and I ultimately had to use PVA. The really good thing about Cork is that it has that nice the edges, it has that nice torn effect, and it can really look like a destroyed road. So what I've done on the Cork sheet is to show one side of that, and it also has that sort of texture on top of it that looks sometimes like large bits of tarmac. Ultimately, I think Cork is another, it's a fine option as far as road surface, and all you really need to do is cut it to size and glue it on. You'll notice a trend with these, but the next 2 we are actually going to step it up a little bit. For the foam sheet, you can actually put in cracks in the road. All you really need to do is get a pen and draw them in. You can't really do that on the sandpaper, and you can't really do that on the Cork, but you can do it on the foam because it's foam. You can do an indent. A pen or pencil or something like that will do it. Then we're going to move on to the filler, and now the filler is obviously filler's quite cheap. Spackle for you Americans. You spread that on. You take it out of the tub, you spread it on quite evenly, wet your finger so it's all nice and smooth, but then we're going to rough up the texture. Now, I did 2 versions of this. I did a version where I roughed it up a lot, and a version where I roughed it up only a little bit. And the way that you're going to get the texture is once you've got it all smooth, nice. You can give it a minute or two so it becomes a little bit I don't know what the word is, but a little bit more sticky, I guess is the term. And then all you really need to do is take like a brush, a cheap brush, maybe one that you would paint, like a large brush, or one that you would use for painting the walls, and we're just going to like stipple it on. And that'll just create like a ripple texture. You can sort of use your finger if you want, or even a plastic bag would be okay, but the brush has that nice little like peaks and troughs because it's like a solid brush, so you sort of just dab it on and that'll give you the texture. Now I did try to get cracks in this, and there was one where I did the cracks on the foam before I put the filler on, but then the filler obviously just filled in the cracks because that is literally what it's designed to do. If you were trying to get cracks in this, what you would do is you'd texture it all up first and then maybe just take like a cocktail stick or even a pen if you're not bothered about the pen, and then draw the cracks on, and that actually looked okay, like it would be a reasonable effect. And the last one I'm going to be looking at, as I said, is the AK Terrain's asphalt diorama stuff. Now it's diorama stuff, but it actually, like, it's about £10 I think, and you get quite a sizable amount. Obviously it's not as much as like filler is a specially designed product, but I reckon you could easily do a table's worth in it, which I think I might be doing. So and that is literally just a case of spreading it on. It's as simple as that. Now you can add a little bit of water, a little bit like filler in that sense. Adding water will allow you to create smoother lines. Now I tried a couple of pieces here. I did bits where I'd left like thick blobs, less blobs. I did one where I did carvings in the road underneath, in the foam underneath. And what you'll notice about this stuff is that it does sort of contract, which is sort of good. So it looks like a flat, shiny paste, and then what happens is that the paste sort of like contracts or evaporates. I'm not 100% sure what it's doing, and then it leaves like the texture. And the good thing about that is because of the cracks underneath, it sort of then, and even though it wasn't showing the cracks at first, it then started showing the cracks. And you can again just do like you did with the filler, and if you want to, once you've put your paste on, is just get a cocktail stick and then draw in the cracks with that. That also would look fine. So then what I did is I essentially just sprayed them all black, barring the black, the AK Terrain's asphalt stuff, because that's already black, and I use spray paint just because I want it to be quick. Normally I would probably just brush it on, especially depending on how it was on the board. So yeah, once you've sprayed it black, I'll try and show you the texture. Now, getting black and white to show on camera very well is quite difficult, so do apologise if anything looks a little bit weird here, but the sandpaper went on pretty damn nice. The sandpaper has a really nice look of like fresh, pure, pristine tarmac. It really does look good. As I said, the only real problem with it is generally the fact that it's going to come in a roll and you're limited by the width of the roll, but really tarmac looked pretty nice. Very simple technique. I am going to dry brush these so you can see them a little bit better, but you may not want to dry brush them, it's completely up to you. But yeah, tarmac looked really nice. And then a surprise one for me was actually the first filler one that I did, where the texture, I didn't do a very like strong texture. Actually worked out pretty damn nicely, and you know, I actually really like it. It's a cheap option goes because filler's reasonably cheap, and the fact that it's not limited by size, it's only limited by time. The filler option I actually really liked. Really, like, it's not amazing because you've still got you don't have like a stony look, but it's got little peaks and troughs. It's really cheap, and ultimately I actually think the filler option was pretty nice. Now, moving on to the craft foam, I think it's called EVA foam, but it's like 2mm EVA foam. Really, the cracks looked fine. The texture's there, but it's very mild. It's very subtle. I think this texture would possibly be better for small scale. So like, it's hard to explain, but you know what I mean. Like, instead of bigger models, when you had smaller models and you didn't need that much texture, I think the EVA foam would be good. Also, with the EVA foam, like, there's just not that much texture to dry brush, so I would almost not bother with the dry brushing part of it. If anything, it sort of runs the risk of ruining it. My cork didn't actually turn out as well as it could have done, partly because when I sprayed it, I accidentally left it outside for like an hour, and I don't know why. It seemed to have taken a bit of abuse, but you get that lovely edge with the cork, that lovely like destroyed road surface edge kind of thing. It still looks fantastic, and the texture on top, you can dry brush it. It looks great. You can't really do cracks into it in like cracks, but you can do torn bits of earth, if that makes sense. But the cork is a really nice option. Now, moving on then to the last part, which is the aka terrain asphalt stuff. It's really like, it was really strange stuff in my head. I like the fact that it all levels out generally, and it all comes to a level, but it seemed to be very if you touched it, it would basically easily transfer whatever you like residue you have on you to the material. Like it's also got like little bits of like shiny speckles in it, and I'm not 100% sure if Tarmac really does have that. It's not overpowering though, to be fair, but the fact that like if you touched it, if you rubbed any part of it, you basically I literally would go wash my hands, dry my hands, and then touch it, and it would sort of like it seemed to transfer or rub off or something. It was a little bit strange in that sense. A bit of me wonders if it would actually be better if I painted it instead of just leaving it as like black. But the fact that it all levels out, it sort of contracts and it starts showing the texture. The texture is fantastic. I did a couple versions of this, just for my own sense, because it's actually the product I really want to use. It does look really nice. It has a really like tarmac-y look, like, for sure. I also think it might be good in like lava situations, like lava-y rock, because for sure that it's a very interesting texture, and I definitely like it. I just was a little bit weirded out by the fact that anytime I touched it, it seemed to not get ruined, but it seemed to then have a bit of my texture on it. So that's it. I mean, that's 5 different ways of making it. There's probably countless more. I know there's a famous method of where you get like you paint it black, and then you get like a white or a light grey spray paint, and you sort of dust it on to give it sort of like the speckly effect. That can look really nice and really realistic for certain kinds of roads. I'm here sort of just looking at like pure black kind of city style roads, and we'll go through them and I'll just talk about them. I've not got every sheet here, but the sandpaper look is actually a really nice look. It's pristine in a sense, almost a little bit too pristine, a little bit too uniform for me, but it's very hard to argue that it wasn't pretty damn perfect. Now, I use 60 grit sandpaper. You could use different grits, obviously, to get different effects, different sizes, because I'm sure that the grit is the strength of the bubbles, the balls, or whatever. I don't actually know what. I mean, is it made out of sandpaper? I don't know. But yeah, for sure, a very uniform look, very nice look effect, like nice looking effect though. As I said, you are limited. If you buy a roll, you're not limited by the length. You're only limited by the width. But if you can find the width that you want, you could literally just buy a roll and use that for everything. So keep that in mind. It's also not very expensive. Like a roll of it, I think it's about £10. But these sheets were like £2 from like Wilkinson's, so definitely not expensive in that sense. Then moving on to the filler. The filler for me was a bit of a surprise. I didn't expect it to be so good. The first one that I did that had the sort of milder version of the texture, pretty nice. The fact that you can do cracks in it, like once you've textured it up, you just draw it in with a little cocktail stick. Really really good. I'm sort of actually tempted to use this for my city board rather than this stuff. But I don't know, it's maybe not the best road surface, but it's such a nice looking effect anyway, if that makes any sense. And the filler you can buy for like a pound if you really want to, and the brushes are cheap, and you would literally just spread it on, dab it on with your brush, paint it black, done. Very simple, very effective. The EVA's like craft foam 2mm stuff, the texture on it was very weak. Maybe I didn't have the right stuff, who knows, but I didn't really like the texture. You can draw your cracks in it and stuff like that. Again, you're limited by it being a sheet, and the sheet you'd have to like mesh together, etc. You've got certain width and lengths and all that kind of stuff. It is reasonably cheap though. You can buy a really nice big sheet of it for like £1 from Hobbycraft in the UK, so not too expensive. It's also on Amazon and stuff like that if you need it. Ultimately though, the texture wasn't particularly great. You can't really dry brush it, but you can do cracks well. That one's not really one that's not in the running. Cork sheets, again, because it's a sheet material, you're limited by the size of the cork sheet. If you wanted longer or wider than what you can buy, then you're naffed. Now those Cork sheets that I was using, I actually got them from Hobbycraft, and from Wilkinson's in the UK, Wilco's in the UK, and they're like table mats essentially. I don't think they're doing them anymore because I tried to find some and they didn't seem to be doing them, but you know, I'm sure somewhere else would do them. The edges of a torn edge of a Cork sheet, very nice looking effect for sure. Really looks like a broken up earth look. Really is nice. And then that little texture on top, you can dry brush it out, really bring out the texture. That's one of those things, like on small scale, like miniature bases, I highly recommend it because it looks fantastic. I think it would be a bit of a pain to do the whole city as that, but if you can buy it cheap enough, yeah, go ahead. It's a very suitable material for sure. It's just, I think it would be a bit more expensive to keep buying them for the amount of quantity you might need to do like a whole city board or something like that. And finally then we'll move on to this particular stuff, this aka Terrain's asphalt diorama stuff. I said I'm mildly, I don't want to say concerned, but just the fact that I would easily get texture on it, like it would get any kind of substance on it that I touched it with, which is possibly because it's really rough. It would actually just like take the dirt off my fingers. But if it's a diorama piece, so it's probably not meant for touching, but if I'm obviously making a wargaming board out of it, I will be touching it. So this is it's done a spanner in the works because my plan was just to use this. It's a little messier in the fact that it's a black paste, so you've got to make sure that, you know, it's going to get on your hands and stuff like that ultimately, so you need to make sure you've got a cloth with it. It's really easy to apply though. You just get like a bit of card or a spatula or something and just move it out. Looks really nice. The texture on it, very nice. It's a very realistic effect for sure. I'm just a little bit concerned of how playable it would be in the long run, but then again, you could potentially just use it for the effect and then paint it anyway. Maybe that would be the best. At least then you probably wouldn't transfer like random materials off. I never tried it with Katie. Maybe, you know, it could just be I've got like dirt or something on my fingers, but I literally tried to wash my hands and then touch it and it was doing it. Apart from that, the only slight issue I had with that was the little sparkly bits. I'm not sure if roads have sparkly bits. It wasn't like loads, it was like the odd little bit of sparkle, and again, maybe that's contamination from my room. Who knows? But that's it. 5 ways to make tarmac/asphalt roads. To make curves and show it on your city board. I will be doing a tutorial where I'm doing my city board, so if you want to see one of these effects get put in use, check that out. And I will be referring to this video in that video, because just say, oh look, there's these alternatives. There's probably and definitely certainly more alternatives than what I'm showing you here, but these are the ones that I could very easily get. And I think they actually all are suitable in certain situations. The worst one for me was probably the EVA foam, the craft foam, because it just wasn't enough texture. But as I said, if you reduce the scale, so you've got like smaller miniatures, probably makes more sense. So if you like this video, press like. Thank you to all my Patreons and stuff like that. I do really appreciate that. Subscribe to the channel if you're interested in terrain, for sure. Please do. Have a most beautiful day, and goodbye.